So the next on the agenda is a presentation from Andrew Appel, professor. And Dr. Appel, I remember when I was in college, if I called a professor and he was a doctor, he used to always get mad at me. So if I'm wrong, please
I'm not too
let me
picky
know.
about that.
We have some feedback here. Tricks.
Just let them talk one at a time, because the only way they can feed through sound through here is through the TV screen.
Was he talking too?
Yeah, he was just talking.
Oh, I thought it was feedback.
Yeah.
All right, so Dr. Appel, if you'd like to proceed.
Is Sean able to put up my slides for you to see?
Yes.
Okay. I can't see the slides for where I am, but we'll make it work. The main point of my presentation is to explain my understanding of what Secretary Raffensperger proposes for the vote tabulation or verification by optical character recognition, and then what I see as the problems with that. But first, I have a few sort of background and introductory slides. Slide 2, please. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a computer scientist. You have your feedback problem fixed?
We need a computer scientist here to help us with this. Please proceed.
All right. I'm a computer scientist. I specialize in cybersecurity software verification, and for more than 20 years, I've been studying voting systems, voting machines, election procedures, the security and accuracy of those processes. I've published at least 5 articles in scientific journals and law journals about these issues, and over 90 blog articles explaining these issues to the public over the last 20 years. Recently, I was appointed by the state of Texas to their voting machine examination committee. I do this in a nonpartisan way. There have been a lot of elections since 2003 when I started doing this. It's really about the technology and how we can have integrity in elections. Next slide, please. We seem to be missing a slide. Yes. Okay, well, a lot of what I'm going to present today, I wrote up in a blog article last Friday at blog.citp.princeton.edu about ballot tabulation by uploading scanned images for OCR. Next slide. Most counties in most states vote by hand-marked optical scan paper ballots counted by optical scan voting machines in the polling place or in the elections office. Next slide. To accommodate voters with disabilities who cannot mark a paper ballot by hand, the usual accommodation is a ballot marking device with both a touch screen and an audio tactile interface. Next slide. So here's just a map. The counties marked in green vote by hand-marked paper ballots counted by optical scanners. Counties marked in yellow vote by ballot marking devices for all voters with an optical scanning of those paper ballots. And the counties marked in red use paperless touchscreens with no paper trail at all, where you've got to completely take the computer's word for it. Next slide. So, there's a issue with the use of ballot marking devices for all voters. Next slide. The problem is that BMDs are computers that can be hacked just as easily as other voting machines or other computers. If the BMD is hacked, it can print fraudulent votes onto the ballot paper. Any audit or recount will count the fraudulent votes. Next slide. Most voters don't examine the ballot paper closely enough to catch differences from what they indicated on the touchscreen, if such differences occur. There's been several studies of the behavior of real voters in different places that all come to this same conclusion. And what that means, next slide, is that even, those 7% of the voters that check their ballots carefully enough that would catch the BMD cheating, if it were cheating, they might be safe against having their vote stolen, but the other 93% of voters are vulnerable to vote hacking. And once it's marked on the paper that way, then any recount, even a recount by hand, will count the fraudulent votes marked on the paper. Next slide. Then there's the issue of encoding votes in QR codes, and I know you're very familiar with this issue. Next slide. But the problem here is the scanner counts the votes in the QR code, as you know, and these are not the votes that the voter can read printed on the paper, so the voter has no way to verify the actual vote that will be counted. So all of that's background. I'm sure you're quite familiar with it. And also, as you know, next slide, the Georgia legislature passed a bill that would remove the QR codes and barcodes from those ballots. And that's a step forward, not just in my opinion as a cybersecurity expert, but the consensus opinion of election cybersecurity experts who study these issues is it's definitely a step forward. So next slide, I'm going to talk about what Secretary of State Raffensperger plans to do. But before I do that, next slide, I want to talk about how elections are normally run, including in Georgia. Voters mark paper ballots with a pen or with a ballot marking device. The paper ballots are scanned by optical scanners to reduce the danger of computer hacking. Voting machines, such as optical scanners, are not directly connected to the internet. Scanners tabulate the votes. They can print out those results, and they do print out those results immediately at the close of the polls on paper, and they also write those results to removable media for transfer to the election office. So, and even in the election office, the best practice is that election office computers that do the aggregation of votes are not directly connected to the internet. So these practices, they're not perfectly secure, but they're basically the best we know how to do in general. Next slide. Now I want to talk about Secretary of State's plans for optical scanning. And I'm basing my explanation on his testimony and documents at the legislative hearing on January 21st, the state budget bill that has a certain line item passed in March, the report illustrated here from a company called Enhanced Voting about how they conducted the 2024 optical character recognition audit for the state of Georgia, and the instruction manual from Enhanced Voting from that same audit. And so I can't know exactly what your Secretary of State plans to do, but I can explain it as best I can from all of these sources. Next slide. And by the way, the Secretary of State refers to this as a double-blind system. I don't actually see what this has to do with the term double-blind, so I'll just refer to it as OCR-based tabulation. And the basic idea is to tabulate the votes from the text on these ballots. The same ballots that your Dominion ICX ballot marking devices are currently them from the human readable text instead of from the QR code. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. So the idea is that the voters will use the same Dominion ICX touchscreens, which will produce the same paper ballot with the QR code and the text. Next slide. You'll scan the ballots with the same Dominion ICP scanners, which will tabulate votes from the QR codes. These scanners also routinely produce 200 dot per inch digital images of the ballots in a computer file. 200 dots per inch is sort of medium resolution. Next slide. the procedure, next slide, please. The procedure used in the 2024 OCR audit and the procedure, as I understand it, to be used to tabulate votes in the November 2026 election is to upload these digital images from the scanners to county election computers. This is actually normally part of the process. The digital images are conveyed from the Dominion scanners to the Dominion election database at the county election headquarters, along with other election results from that polling place. They'll go into the county election database, which is managed by the Dominion election management software. Next slide, please. Then this is the new part, the OCR upload part. The digital image files from each county's election database will be uploaded to a cloud computing server managed by the Enhanced Voting Company. And that company will use optical character recognition software to tabulate votes based on the human readable text printed on, well, I was going to say printed on the paper ballots, but they're going to do it based on the text that's in those digital image files. And that's one of the issues. And then Enhanced Voting will transmit results, tabulations, back to Georgia election officials who will then report them as certified election results. So that's, as best I understand it, Secretary Raffensperger's plan. And here's the problem. In contrast to standard election procedures in Georgia and everywhere else, where you tabulate votes within a single optical scanner in each, or multiple optical scanners, but each set of votes is within one optical scanner from the time it's scanned to the close of the polls, where the results are printed on paper, witnessed by witnesses in the polling place, available for upload, and where the cybersecurity of those voting machines is far from perfect, but the attack surface for fraud is limited to that one machine. In contrast, the whole procedure of uploading the files to the county election database, and we know that the security of the Dominion election database files is not very good. It really would be possible for people to replace one set of digital images with another. Then the upload of that on the internet to somebody else's cloud computing server. And then there's a question of who's doing that upload and which files get uploaded. Then the optical character recognition software itself is not an EAC certified, voting system. So I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to opine on whether it's legal, but if a state required that its election tabulation be done with election equipment certified by a test lab that in turn was certified by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, I haven't seen any evidence that this procedure fits into that process. Next slide. So again, compared with the standard method, this proposed method has many, many more steps where there's opportunity for substitution or substitution of data files, or the fraudulent use of different software than was expected. And that's really where I see a problem with this approach. Next slide. And I'm not going to tell you exactly how you should proceed. That's up to you, the Georgia legislature, the governor, the Secretary of State. But it really is true that the optical scanners you already have can tabulate hand-marked paper ballots. Those Dominion ICP scanners are used in many states to tabulate hand-marked paper ballots. They're used in Georgia to tabulate hand-marked paper emergency ballots. Next slide. You don't need to apply any software upgrades to those machines to use them for that purpose. There are some software upgrades that you could apply that would fix some security vulnerabilities, but that's really a completely separate issue from whether they can tabulate hand-marked paper ballots. It would mean that your counties would have to make a real adjustment to use paper ballots, and you could do it with pre-printed paper ballots or with ballot-on-demand printers. Either way works well in other states, even for vote centers with many ballot styles in urban areas. And I've talked to election administrators in other states about their use of either ballot-on-demand printers or all pre-printed ballots without any ballot-on-demand printers. And there's better and worse ways of doing it. There are better and worse ballot-on-demand systems, but it's totally practical and it's routine in other states. Next slide. And basically all I have, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Shall I go first, or would somebody else like to go first?
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, but you're going to be long, and I'm not.
Okay.
If you want to go first, please.
Mic's on or mic's off?
You're good to talk.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
No, this is your witness. Please,
My witness.
please proceed.
Professor Appel, thank you so much for being here. This was highly informative. And I appreciate you doing it very much and the work that you do for elections. As you know, that there was, or as I believe you to know, that on November 7th, 2025, there was a letter sent from the Office of the Secretary of State, which was sent by Counsel Charlene McGowan and the Elections Director Blake Evans, and it was sent to Representative Victor Anderson and Representative Tim Fleming that were part of, or continue to be, the committee still is in existence, the House Blue Ribbon Study Committee on Election Procedures. And in there, it references a quote-unquote double-blind counts using human readable text. It says the tabulated results for every race on the general election ballot would be done by OCR. The OCR tabulation based on the human readable text confirmed the scanner tabulation with 100% accuracy. Is there any industry standard for some kind of double-blind review or counting in the election world?
The term double-blind is not normally used in the election world. You know, it's used in other areas where you're studying human subjects or where there's peer review of scientific papers. So I don't actually know what double-blind means in that context. And I'm not actually familiar with that letter that you reference. I haven't read it. So I'm sorry, I can't help you with that one.
Okay, and then also enhanced voting seems to be in a lot of procedures that we're doing. And they are doing our election night recording, and then they're also involved in these audits. So just from a simple view, it looks like they're auditing their own work. And then this would be adding another layer of involvement with enhanced voting. Would it be a good idea to consistently have conflicted vendors involved in this process?
I think if you're going to have audits, it would be a good idea to have them sort of transparent and under the control of a public entity. And really, I'm unclear about whether this OCR scan is meant as an audit or as the tabulation.
So that was going to be my next question, because as you're explaining it, I'm envisioning how this would happen. You know, I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and we were talking about the differences between the ballots as they look now versus a full-face ballot. And, you know, we go through, you know, as, you know, part of the public, we go through these voting things, we're in a hurry, you know, we have things on our agenda to do when we go to vote, and it's like, I remember voting before where you had all the options on the ballot and you chose your options and that kind of thing. And since this advent of this wonderful new machine voting with these awesome BMDs, when your ballot prints out, it only prints out your selection. It doesn't print out every selection that you have in options to vote for. So when this quote-unquote audit would happen and the scanning would take place, it's only scanning what's printed on the ballot, and then that goes to the tabulator. But then I'm confused as to how this would work with the image audit, and it seems like the Secretary is saying that the image audit would be the official tabulation of the results in the election. Is that your understanding too?
He has said it both ways. In some of his written materials and in the state budget line item that was passed on March 3rd, it's referred to as a tabulation. In the legislative hearing on January 21st, Senator Burns asked him, is it a tabulation or is it a verification? And he said it's a verification, even though the written materials he provided to the legislature for that hearing used the word tabulation. So, whether it's a tabulation or a verification, let's just assume that the ballot scanners are going to read the QR code, because that's the only thing they can read on that style of BMD printed ballot. And they're going to print out a tabulation, because that's what they do. And the optical character recognition is going to work by the procedure that I described. And we can let the lawyers or the public representatives decide which thing is the tabulation and which thing is the verification.
Okay, and then is there any place else in the country that relies on image results as official vote tabulations?
No, not to my knowledge in this way. That official results are obtained from the optical scan voting machines, which are self-contained. And then in some states, they do a risk limiting audit before the certification of official results. And in other states, they do not. But in all the states that I know of, they derive their tabulation directly from the voting machines. There are a few states that have a few counties that do hand counting of paper ballots, and they derive their results from the hand count. That's mostly in counties with small population, maybe up to 5,000 or 8,000 voters. But other than that, it's all, the machine counts.
Okay, and lastly, so therefore, would you say that there's a conflict of interest in having an uncertified system produce tabulation results and the same vendor aggregate and report those results, and then that same vendor to do an audit of those results? Would that kind of be a conflict in your opinion?
Well, again, I'm not a lawyer, but it does seem like you're putting all your trust in one vendor. And, the principles of running U.S. elections are that we have bipartisan election boards, bipartisan teams of poll workers, because it shouldn't be up to one party to have to trust the other party to run the election right. It should be sort of transparent and visible to all that the election is fair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Appel. I appreciate it greatly, and I'll let some of the other board members ask you some questions.
Thank you very much. Dr. Appel, thank you for attending today. As I was laying in bed last night about 11 o'clock reading your stuff and trying to develop some questions for this, as I've told people before, I'm the most boring man in the world, and that's kind of what I do. But I had a few questions. I do not oppose the removal of the QR codes. I have stated I'm indifferent towards it, but I do not oppose the removal of QR codes. But I have some questions about the QR codes, and specifically about how big of a problem it's been, and then also about this optical scan proposal. So have you done any research to find out how many times in past elections QR codes have been hacked successfully?
I have never seen any evidence that they've actually been hacked in a real election. You know, these voting machines are quite accurate when they haven't been hacked. We hope they've never been hacked. It may be true they've never been hacked, but we also know how vulnerable they are to hacking, and that's been clearly demonstrated by a scientific examination.
Right, and well, we know that any kind of technology can be hacked just about, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And so it's anytime you're using any kind of technology, it's susceptible to being hacked, whether it's
Right.
a
Even
voting machine or your phone or your computer or your car
That's right.
or whatever else. So it's,
even hand-marked paper ballots counted by optical scanners, those optical scanners can be hacked, which is why it's a good idea to have human examination of the paper ballots as well. Not necessarily a full recount, which would be quite expensive and impractical, but a statistical risk-limiting audit where you sample some of the ballots and make sure that that the machines weren't hacked this time.
yeah, I wouldn't question. I was just saying that anything can be hacked.
Anything can be
So
hacked.
let me see if I can explain this without getting too confusing. So a certain percentage of the people actually read their ballot after they voted, correct? I'm one of those. I read every line to see if it showed up exactly who I voted for.
It would
So
not
I'm
surprise
one
me
of
that
that 10% or whatever, right?
it wouldn't surprise me that the chair of the state election board is careful about his ballot.
I'm careful about a lot of things, not always the things I should be careful about, but I do. I read every line to make sure that what I voted for is what is printed on the paper. I've always done that my entire life, voting life. So a certain percentage of people, and would it be? You said 7%. I mean, is that roughly what it is? And is that what the statistics show, that only 7% of the people read their ballot?
There's different ways to measure it, but yeah, 7% read their ballot carefully enough to notice when it's actually been hacked. When one contest on the ballot is marked differently on the paper than what they actually did on the touch screen.
And they assume that's hacking instead of just pushing the wrong button on the screen.
Well, indeed, if you notice that what's marked on your ballot is different than what you thought you did on the screen, it could be that the machine was hacked, and it could be that that you made a mistake. But I can explain how that 7% was measured if you're interested.
I'd love. I have a degree in mathematics, so I love numbers. So.
Is that a yes? I'm sorry, I can't hear you now.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. So there's different ways to measure what voters do with their ballots. One way is to, and this is one way it was done in Tennessee or in Georgia actually, is you stand at the side of the room where observers are allowed to see during a real election. You can't see what's on the voters' ballots, but you can observe how much time the voter spends looking at their ballot. And you notice that the vast majority of voters don't look at their ballot for more than, well, half of them don't look at their ballot at all before they put it in the scanner, and half look for, 3 or 4 seconds or something. But here's a way to measure what would happen if the machine were actually hacked. And so this experiment was done in a public library about a week after a real election in Michigan. And the voters, citizens walking by were asked, are you a registered voter in this town? And would you like to try out a new kind of voting machine? And they were shown to a ballot marking device that was programmed with the ballot from the very same election they may have voted in the previous week. And they were asked to vote as they did in the election the previous week. And this machine, this was not a real election. If you do this experiment in a real election, that's probably a felony. So you want to do it in a controlled. So the machine was actually hacked, so it would change one of their votes. So we know for sure that it would change one of their votes. And what they measured was how many people brought this to the attention of the poll worker. And that was the 7%. So we have all sorts of ways of knowing that voters.
Just continue to talk and right when you started. So I've got to like manually going back and forth.
So it's kind of, you can't banter back and forth. You have to let them talk. And then
I'm going to look at you and you do a thumbs up when I can speak, okay?
Go ahead.
So let me see if I can get to where I'm going. So we understand that 7% of the people look at their ballots after they vote on the machine. And in Georgia, if you have 7 million voters, you're talking about 490,000 voters that actually look at their ballots after they vote, correct?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, 490,000 voters, correct? Correct? Yeah.
All right. I think I know where you're driving at, and let me answer the question I think you're about to ask, because you're laying out something that is a real issue. So if 7% of the voters check their ballots carefully, and let's suppose I hack the machine to shift only 5% of the votes from Smith to Jones. That's enough to shift major elections, especially in Georgia. 5% is a lot. And what that means is that about 1 out of every 200 voters, 7% times 5%, that's about 1 out of every 200 voters, is going to notice that what's marked on their paper is not what they did on the touchscreen. And so then what happens? Well, what's the voter supposed to do in that circumstance? They're supposed to tell the poll worker, this is not how I voted on the touchscreen. And what's the poll worker supposed to do? They're supposed to say, that's all right, sir, we'll void that one and you can have another chance. And let's suppose you use the touchscreen again, it comes out fine, you cast your ballot. So now you're one of the 7% of voters that they didn't have a chance to steal a vote from. But what else? You caught the machine cheating red-handed. Surely you should be able to do something about that. Okay, what can you do? The poll worker can't know whether you made a mistake or whether the machine was cheating, because what was on the touchscreen a minute ago isn't there anymore. And the director of elections can't cancel a set of election results and call for a do-over because 1 out of every 200 voters raised their hand and went to the poll worker and said, this isn't what I marked on the touchscreen. So the problem is that even though some voters will, in this hypothetical scenario where the machine is cheating, even though some voters will catch it, they can't prove it, and there's nothing useful the election director can do about it. There's no recourse. That's the problem.
No, that's not where I was going. So, we got 7% of the voters actually look at their ballot. And then once you get your ballot, you take it and have it scanned in the scanner, right, and counted. And the QR code is what's counted. The voters on the QR code, correct? And the Secretary of
Yes.
State wants to do an optical scan of the readable print on there, correct? To verify whether the QR code is correct. And this is where I get a little confused. So in the last election in 2024, when they did the optical scan comparison, statewide they found very few differences between the optical scan and the QR code, which could happen because maybe no machines were hacked in the state of Georgia, correct? But it would seem to me that if you have 490,000 voters that's being both QR code scanned and optically scanned, you're going to find a big difference, if there was some manipulation of the QR code.
Right.
And which would lead you to believe to lead you to go to a particular polling place or scanner, and you could back that up with a hand count of the votes at that point.
Right. So these kinds of voting machines are extremely accurate when they're not hacked. And I'm totally willing to believe that in the 2024 election in Georgia, these machines were not hacked. And if they were not hacked, you would expect to see almost perfect agreement between the QR codes and the human readable text. The problem is these machines are insecure. They are vulnerable to hacking in the next election. And the next election is important too.
I'm not disagreeing with you on being vulnerable to hack. I mean, like I said, any technology is vulnerable to being hacked, any technology. But my question is, if you had an optical scan as a second set of eyes, and there was a machine that was hacked, there would be a lot of inconsistencies between the optical scan and the QR code. I mean, there has to be, when you have 490,000 voters there that you're,
Well,
you're going to see some inconsistencies if there's a difference between the QR code and what they see on their paper.
if I were the bad guy and hacking your voting machines, I would hack the optical scanners to cheat in the following way. Produce fraudulent ballot images. You're relying on the optical scanner to scan the ballot image of the paper that's presented to them and put that in the computer file for upload. Why not just put a different ballot image? When you do OCR on digital pictures of something, you're also relying on that that's a picture of the true piece of paper, and the computers can manipulate that. It's almost the case that what's on the paper is going to be more reliable than a computer image that's been transferred from one computer to another. I think this optical scan procedure was not useless as a kind of audit to see what we can tell about the ballot scanners, but as a tabulation mechanism, I think it has too many steps of transfer of digital files to be as secure as the methods that most states call for.
I agree with you, but if I'm going to hack something and want to make sure that I'm not caught, I'm going to hack the scanner and not the BMD. Because using the optical scanner along with the QR code, I mean, you've got some, and then the 490,000 people that are looking at their ballots, there's some sort of audit trail or some sort of audit going on. So I'm going to go after the tabulator and try and hack the QR code and hack the ballot image at the same time. So how difficult is it to hack that? How much time does that take? And can you do it while somebody's standing there watching the scanner go on?
Oh, you don't hack the scanner during the election. You hack the scanner well before the election. You hack some central database that loads software into all the scanners in the state or in the county. It's not a question of what you do when somebody's standing there watching.
But the scanners are not connected to each other, so you'd have to hack each individual ones the same as the BMDs, right?
Software is loaded into the scanners from a central place. Election definition files are loaded into the scanners, every scanner before every election, to tell the scanner what's on the ballot. Scanners don't have to be hacked at retail. And that's why paper ballots are important. And Georgia now has paper ballots, which is an improvement on the way things were, 10 years ago. But this particular method of counting the paper ballots by transferring ballot images from one place to another, and then doing OCR just doesn't seem very reliable to me.
Yeah, I'm not arguing with you. I just find that when I want to know the answer, I always ask the opposing questions. So, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Member Gazal.
I appreciate you coming, especially with other commitments of your time, Dr. Appel. But going back to the hypothetical about hacking a scanner, that could happen regardless of the medium, like how the ballot was marked, whether by machine or by hand. Hacking a tabulator would have the same impact, correct?
Not quite. If you only hack the tabulator, then an audit or recount of the actual paper ballots will see what the voter marked on the paper ballot. If you hack the BMD, then you get a mark on the paper ballot that will survive a recount. And the paper ballot is not as useful as sort of ground truth.
But that wasn't my question. My question was hacking the tabulator as opposed to hacking the BMD.
Right.
So a tabulator can be hacked no matter how the ballot is marked, correct?
That is correct.
And an audit, assuming that the source is accurate, an audit would identify that sort of hack regardless.
If the audit is of the actual physical pieces of paper, then you can detect hacking in the scanner. If the audit is of the digital ballot images, then you're trusting that very same scanner that produced them to audit itself, in effect.
But a software independent scan would be different. In other words, if the ballots were rescanned and a different software were used to capture the digital images, and that would create another separation, correct?
The term software independent, as it's used in elections, means independent of any software. So technically, the software independent way to audit or count is to look at the actual pieces of paper without software. But again, even the concept of trying to use software that is different and independent from the other software, when you do that OCR scan of the digital ballot images produced by the optical scanner, then you're taking the word of the optical scanner for what it saw on the paper.
So I wanted to ask about a more recent study on verifiability and correction of errors on BMD ballots, because the Center for Civic Design conducted a study it was published in July of 2024. I don't know exactly when it was undertaken, but it suggested that in fact voters were far more likely to correct errors on BMD ballots versus hand-marked ballots, like to a really significant degree. I was wondering if you had an opportunity to review that study.
I have not.
To some of the older studies that were conducted.
I hadn't seen that study. I have seen one or two of the older usability studies of BMDs. And some of these studies are done to say not only what do voters do, but how could we help them do better? And it's not so easy to help them do better because they're people like the rest of us. And partly it has to do with the readability of the BMD ballot, but you have a particular kind of BMD ballot and it's as readable as it is or as it was last year. So I'm just not that optimistic about our ability to change human behavior in the way they review their ballots.
Thank you, Dr. Appel. I appreciate your time.
Member King.
Okay, man, it feels like you gotta be a tech genius to run elections in Georgia. Good Lord. So I know we had a lot of mention about hacking. I'm concerned about coding errors because when we look at the case that we've all talked about several times, with Michelle Long-Spears, in her instance, her text was correct, but the QR code index was wrong. So my question to start is it possible to hack the index in the QR code, or if there was a coding error and the QR code was wrong but the text was correct, what will happen in that case? In the case of Michelle Long-Spears, we were using this method that you're speaking of. How would that be explained, or how would it be reconciled if the QR code is wrong but the text is right?
Right. So we naively used to think that the QR code would disagree with the text only if there's hacking, but turns out that's not the case. And I'm not familiar with the instance you cite, but I can explain a similar instance that occurred in Northampton County, Pennsylvania, in the 2024 election. It was using a different make of ballot marking device from ES&S. And in that election, the barcodes that encoded the votes disagreed with the human readable text. And it wasn't that yes was swapped with no, it was in one judge retention race, the yes for that judge was swapped with the yes for a different judge in a different judge retention race. So some alert voters discovered this early in the day, and they must have been voters who voted yes on one judge and no on the other judge. And the election administrators studied it and figured out that there had been a mistake in their ballot definition and that they had put one judge's name over here in the barcode list, but over there in the human readable text list. And they figured out that the one in the barcode was actually correct and the one in the text was wrong. And they had to advise voters, don't worry if the text says the judge that you didn't vote for, it'll be recorded correctly, which is not a happy thing for voters to hear, as you can imagine. So Northampton County, Pennsylvania was very unhappy with their election equipment in that case. But it does demonstrate that you're exactly right. There can be coding errors that cause the human readable text to be different from the barcode. And in that case, it can take some sort of forensic examination to figure out which one might actually be what the voter did on the touchscreen.
Okay, so now that we know that, if that was the case, and there was a conflict there, using this method, what will be counted is the ballot image of the text, but that ballot image will be created based off of the QR code's data, correct?
In the case you're describing, where it's a mistake and not deliberate hacking, I would assume that let's assume then that the ballot image is a accurate scan of the picture of the ballot, including its QR code. And this separate OCR step would probably discover that the tabulation from the human readable text OCR differed from the tabulation in the QR code. And then there'd be a big kerfuffle, and maybe election administrators would be able to get to the bottom of what actually happened.
But the voter will have no idea that this is happening, because this will be taking place long after the voter is gone. The voter feels like they've validated, they've looked at their ballot, they've read their text, they walk out feeling confident, and all of this could be happening behind the scenes, correct?
That's correct. And it would be good to have, if the state of Georgia really proceeds with this method, it would be good to have some rulemaking for which vote governs in such a case.
Okay, so, and then my next question is, so are you basically saying that this method here, and it's interesting because I think it was just last night, I heard a former employee from the SOS office, Gabe Sterling, state that this is something that they are seriously considering, is counting, using this method. So I know this is extremely important. But this method would essentially eliminate the source document from being a part of the tabulation process, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it appears to me that we are creating a more complicated method on top of an already complicated method to justify the complications. It feels like we're working backwards at this point. Would you say that, or what would you recommend as it relates to this? Is it to just not do this at all, or where do you stand on this? I know you see the irregularities, but
right. So I agree with your characterization of it as a complicated method layered on another complicated method. And my recommendation is to do what most states do, and which Georgia already has all the equipment it needs to do, which is print out those pre-printed bubble ballots, hand the ballot to the voter can mark it, feed it into the very same Dominion scanners that you have already. For your vote centers in large cities that have a lot of ballot styles, you have a decision to make between using ballot on demand printers or just pre-printing all the different ballot styles and having them available in envelopes at the vote center. And you may think that sounds crazy and impractical, but it's used very successfully in other states, including in large cities. So there are plenty of other election administrators out there who are familiar with these procedures in their counties that probably could give you advice about which ballot on demand printers work well and which don't, and which methods of pre-printed ballots work well and which don't. That would be my basic recommendation.
Thank you, and thank you so much for coming.
Dr. Johnson, do you have a question or anything you'd like to ask?
Just a couple of questions. Dr. Appel, his mic is on.
It is on, it shows green. Here, use this one.
That's weird.
Hello, Dr. Appel. Thank you for being here today and answering our questions. Since you've worked so many years in elections, what would you say to the question of cost of a voting method such as the one that Georgia currently uses compared to a hand-marked paper ballot method of voting?
Yes. So one thing about hand-marked paper ballots is you don't need a whole lot of ballot marking devices in each polling place that all need to be programmed. You need just one for use by voters who can't mark a paper ballot with a pen. And other places that had previously been using BMDs and switched to hand-marked paper ballots found that sort of the preparation and licensing and maintenance fees for all those extra BMDs that you need if every voter is using them was a big savings. Printing of pre-printed paper ballots can be done in expensive ways or inexpensive ways. And I know that savvy election administrators in like Colorado and Utah and so on shop around for expert election printers that can do things at a cost-effective price. So I think in the end, it does not cost more money to use pre-printed paper ballots when you factor in not only the cost of the paper, but the cost of maintenance fees and lease fees and so on all the extra equipment you need if everybody is using ballot marking devices.
I think there's probably just eyeballing the figure, 32,000 BMDs are required for the state of Georgia. If we used hand-marked paper ballots, we'd only need 3,200 BMDs for accessibility purposes. Is it true that the time to vote a ballot has been studied and tracked? I read a study that said it takes an average voter 5 minutes to vote a hand-marked paper ballot compared to 8 minutes to vote on the ballot marking device and print the paper and produce the ballot summary.
That sounds very possible, but I'm not familiar with that particular study. But I will remark this about hand-marked paper ballots. If you're operating a polling place with hand-marked paper ballots, you need one poll book, whether it's an old-fashioned printed one or an e-poll book. You hand the paper ballot to the voter. You need maybe, depending on the size of the precinct, 5 or 6 cardboard privacy screens where they can go to mark their ballot. You need 5 or 6 pens, and that's instead of 5 or 6 ballot marking devices. But you still only need one scanner. The voter takes their ballot, spends their 5 minutes marking it using equipment that costs $100 at most for the privacy screen and the pen, and then comes back and feeds it into the scanner. And that process, as you know, takes only a few seconds because it's the same for whether it was marked with the QR code or marked by hand. So it's really a question of how many minutes does the voter spend occupying expensive election equipment, and there the BMDs really are a problem.
it appears to me that the proposal that's coming from the Secretary of State's office, or perhaps some people in the General Assembly, is that we are now trying to implement two electronic voting methods stacked on top of one on top of the other. However, my question is if the QR code calculation on Dominion scanners will not be legal as of July 1st. Are the closing tabulator tapes illegal also?
I'm not a lawyer, but I would say no. The tabulator tapes produced on election night by the voting machines are calculated only from the QR codes.
So I'm not a lawyer either, but OCR tabulation of ballot images is not EAC certified, as far as I know, and would not be considered an acceptable method of tabulating votes as proposed. Do you have an opinion on that?
It's not impossible to imagine that there could be a voting machine that uses OCR and could pass EAC certification, but I don't know of any that has been, and certainly the software used by Enhanced Voting in the 2024 Georgia audit is not such software. So there's no current voting machine that I know of that uses OCR and is EAC certified.
Enhanced Voting called the procedure that they followed in the 2024 election an audit. At best, I would call it a review of ballot images. I could not call it an audit. Well, thank you, and thank you for pointing out that once a voter leaves the BMD and the image of the ballot that they had just felt like they had voted on a touchscreen, that image disappears. So that if there's ever any question about the choice they made or what was seen on the ballot that they thought they voted on, the ballot image they thought they voted on, they have no way to go back and recover that actual document because the image has disappeared, which creates, a validation issue for every election. But we oftentimes have voters complain that the choice they saw on the computer, on the ballot marking device, it did not have their candidate. And they're almost always convinced that it was their mistake and their lack of attention and not the ballot marking device. And one last question, audits. Audits are machine count sometimes, or recounts are required to be machine count recounts, but a recount using the machines would also just produce the same results even if the results were hacked or not true results. Is that correct?
Well, best practice is to do recounts by hand, especially if the reason for doing the recount is that you have questions about the machines. If you recount QR code ballots afresh, then if the first scanners were hacked and if the recount scanners are hacked the same way, then the fraud will survive. And if they're not hacked the same way or they're not hacked at all, you'll get a fresh count from those QR codes. And now you have to ask, were the BMDs hacked? The standard recommendation is if you have hand-marked paper ballots that you count by optical scanner and you're going to recount them by human beings looking at them in teams of multiple people keeping track of each other. And recounts by machine are not a best practice.
Thank you. I agree with you. And are RLAs valid with ballot marked device ballots?
RLAs cannot detect or correct fraud that came from hacked ballot marking devices, because all the RLA can do is look at the paper ballot. And if that's already fraudulent, there's nothing an RLA can do to correct that.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Member King.
One more question. Would this, if there were coding errors, would it be caught in logic and accuracy testing?
In principle, yes. You know, as we know, logic and accuracy testing is not a good way to detect deliberate fraud, but it can detect coding errors. But it can be hard to do logic and accuracy testing that's so thorough that will catch every possible error. I'm sure that Northampton County, Pennsylvania did logic and accuracy testing, but they didn't catch that one. So, but in principle, yes, it could be caught by logic and accuracy testing.
Well, yeah, because I mean, logic and accuracy testing also did not catch the Michelle Long-Spears error either in DeKalb County. Thank you.
Any further questions for the professor?
I had one question.
Yes, sir, Mr. Executive Director.
Professor Appel, could you just give me an update if you happen to know? I understand that when Dominion was implemented, there's been numerous vulnerabilities. Whether or not it's ever been hacked or not, that's not what I'm talking about. There's been numerous vulnerabilities that have been cited that there could be a hacker. And so much so that I think in the Curling Raffensperger case, after all of those documents were unsealed by the courts, that Dominion came out with a patch software. And that patch software was supposed to address some of those vulnerabilities. In Georgia, I believe we still have the 5.5 Dominion version. And while it was suggested through the Curling Raffensperger case that patch software be applied, I don't think Georgia has ever done that.
I think you are absolutely right in every respect that in the legislative hearing on January 21st, I think it was Senator Dolezal asked Secretary Raffensperger that question, and he said, no, that it's still 5.5A that you're using, which is the unpatched software. So in general, it would be a good idea to install the newer version of the Dominion firmware, which would have fewer security vulnerabilities.
And with the 5.5 Dominion software that we currently have, do you know the date when that software was originally created?
No, I don't. I imagine it would be sometime around 2018, but that's just a guess.
I've read different reports. I've read 2016, 15, and 18. Either way, it doesn't matter. We'll go with 2018. So we're talking about software that is 7 years old. What is the common upgrade of a software program for voting? Do you know that?
7 years by itself is not ridiculous, all other things being equal. That jurisdictions would like to be able to purchase equipment and not have to spend time and money upgrading it every single year. So I don't want to make a judgment just based on 7 or 9 years. But when a manufacturer does produce an update with improved security, it's probably a good idea to install it.
Yes, and it was recommended by the court in the Curling Raffensperger that be done. That I think what Secretary of State Raffensperger decided to do, what I've read, I wish they were here to address this question, so I have to just say it out loud and let it lay. I wish that they would have applied that software patch at a minimum, as opposed to doing what they refer to as health checks, is what I understand, which is where they would go around to certain precincts and check on the software, had it been hacked, had it not been hacked.
Sure, if that's a question, but makes sense to me.
We were supposed to have someone here from the Secretary of State office to address some of these questions, and they had a last minute cancellation. So that was one of my questions, and had they been here, I wanted to hear where we are as of this date in our current Dominion software, because clearly it's been shown. And again, I think we get lost sometimes in saying that it's been hacked. That's not the point. If you've got a system that is very vulnerable to over 25 cybersecurity software people that have independently looked at this, then you should surely take a look at what you've got. And those were some of the questions I wanted to ask Blake Evans today.
Any further questions from the board? Dr. Appel, we greatly appreciate you sitting through us and answering some questions, taking time. I understand you're at a conference, and we appreciate you taking time to answer questions for the board and for the public today. So,
I'm happy to do it, and thank you for being willing to listen to me.
thank you. I think we're finished with him, Sean.
Thank you.